Alright, so this is take 2 of my thoughts on Dan Carlin's Common Sense podcast on Savior Corp LLC. First time around, I didn't have any coffee in me, and my thoughts were really scatterbrained, and it wasn't making a whole lot of sense. And I'm probably not going to make a whole lot of sense this time either. But the first, he had it broken down in 2 parts. The first part I'll address was, the only thing I can address it as is saying, begging the question, who do you trust? Who do you trust and why? And what are you going to, what does that trust mean? Because that's the real question I guess we have to ask. And I preface that into saying that, what he talks about was, I like the fact that Dan Carlin always tries to come up with solutions to our corrupt system, our political system, that is. What can we do about it? So, I like it when people, they acknowledge that there's a problem, and they at least try to come up with solutions. And his solution was, and apparently Ralph Nader also had this similar solution and had written a book about it, was the only people who can make a difference are the people who have power, and a lot of times those people who have power are the same people who have a lot of money. So he's saying the only people that can save us are the wealthy, the elite, the powerful at this point, because our country's in a stalemate in our political system. This lack of bipartisanship or strict partisanship by either party results in nothing being accomplished and just further deterioration of our society and our political system. So one of his solutions was, just let the rich people take over. Let them form a group of people that can or influence the system more directly. And surprisingly enough, that's what he said, is happening. The CEO recently of Starbucks came out and said, I'm starting a campaign, and we're not going to fund incumbents until they start working to create bipartisan solutions to our problems and quit fighting for just partisan, ideological or special interests. So, of course, at the same time, you do that, and he also acknowledges this too, that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place where, so a lot of people, you have government on one side that's inefficient and dangerous, and on the other side you have corporations whom we, are employed by, and they're also dangerous because they can essentially turn us into indentured servants. They want to get rid of all the regulations and just, pollute our society, pollute our lives, pollute our environment, and pay us nothing while making us work to, fatten their pockets. Whereas you have government, on the other hand, that wants to pay, give out freebies to everybody, and is terribly inefficient and waste money. So, you have these, those are the stereotypes of basically the 2 parties in our current situation. So, Dan was saying, well, the only way to solve it is, again, with these political, our most influential people. Those people are the people with most power and most money, directly intervening and taking action into the system, which, seems to lean on one side, the corporate side. So, and of course, I would say, well, the problem is really we have both sides working too closely together. You have, and my solution is actually to pin them against each other, which would actually create further partisanship between the two. But it would have to be under the realization that that's what your intentions are, is for the best interest of the consumers, not for any one. And that's where it gets challenging, is because you always become a special interest. If you're employed by the federal government, and that government program was, initiated and started for the very reason that the corporate or the private industry was not providing that service or not meeting that need of the people, then that becomes a problem. Likewise, on the corporate side, if you did away with small government, private industry does whatever they want to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it ultimately boils down to the question of, well, who do you trust? And I don't know, even if you trust anybody, I don't know how that's going to make any difference, really. Maybe it's not so much a problem of the system itself, but maybe the problem that we're too easily misled. And of course everybody says that. Well, they're a bunch of sheep will wake up, I don't know, it leaves me in a very apathetic state of our politics, just because I don't have a firm solution, and unfortunately I don't think anybody else does either. Second half of his episode was on the fat police, and basically he describes himself, Dan Carlin describes himself as a freedom nut, and he's for anything that promotes freedom within our society. And he was, the thing that he says he scares him most is situations like the fat police. In other words, where he referred to a journal Journal of Medicine article where they said basically we need to incentivize people to eat healthy and to exercise, and the way that and we do that by adjusting their premiums. Those who exercise or eat healthy and don't smoke have to pay less in premiums for their insurance, and those who don't pay more. He says he doesn't like that idea because, well, how are you going to enforce that? I mean, you do that, but what happens to the people that don't pay anyways, and that are already sick? And I mean, apart from the ethical issue of just letting people, punishing those people who are already, even if it is their own fault, behavioral risks. Look at it from a broader perspective of freedom. We're punishing everybody in a way because of the few. I mean, you're only looking at it through the narrow view of health. He says, well, what about those other people who are risky, who enjoy mountain biking or skydiving, or how do you associate risk and costs to those people who choose to partake in risky activities? We're focusing on one issue, but yet by trying to focus on it by monetary means, everyone ends up suffering. You have to basically start restricting everybody's freedom, and then nobody's free, and no one's happy. And it's interesting because that same thought applies. I mean, it's the great balance of freedom with protection. Some people say we shouldn't have either. I mean, on 60 Second Science, they just talked about in Germany, I think it was Germany, they came up with a study. They were trying to produce better braking systems by reading people's minds before they actually applied their brakes, so that way they could, there's a delay between what your mind thinks and how your body reacts, and if they could actually read your mind and send it straight to the, realize you're about to have a wreck and put on the brakes for you before you even have time to react yourself, or start applying the brakes. They did this, and they found that they could reduce or they could increase the braking distance by 12 feet, which is pretty substantial. But they used that argument in saying also too, I think it was that same article, about how speed limit laws, the best way to reduce accidents and injuries is to lower the speeds. But at the same time, by doing that, you're restricting people's freedom to drive. So, I'd be interested to hear Dan's thoughts on things like that. Same issue, like in Alabama, we have another issue of they're trying to make pseudoephedrine prescription drug. The reason why they're trying to do that is because we have a meth problem, or, so those, and it's always interesting to say this because, like, the meth problem is really the only problem the meth problem is with people who do meth. It's not that meth itself is a problem, it's that people are doing meth and it destroys their lives and the lives of their family and friends. And I realize that. But at the same time, why are we going to punish the rest of society because of the choices of some individuals to do that, who can't either control themselves, this is, this same questions asked with the issue of alcohol. Coleman, where I'm from, it was a dry county. Last year it became wet, and that's kind of it. Ultimately, it begs the question of freedom. Of should we restrict everybody's freedom because of a few people who can't control themselves, and punish society because of their consequences? I guess you have to balance it, which is worse, the people who can't control themselves and they end up damaging society because of their actions, or do we punish everybody in a way to try to negate and reduce those incidences by those people who can't control themselves and their consequences of their actions? So I guess that's where we always end up jumping, where the division falls is on which side of the fence do you fall on freedom or protection. So, something to think about. Thanks.